clearing and settlement analyst. Okay, and this is a frequent place where jobs tend to come for freshers, and usually people do not know how to prepare for such interviews, right? So first, let's whenever you get such positions, it's a good idea to just look at what exactly are you expected to do, even if though you might not understand really what exactly the role entails, right? Specifically your key responsibilities you might actually not understand, but it's still a good idea to just go through the entire job descriptions first, and to understand what is the role of the company that you're applying to in this entire process, right? So today we're talking about clearing and settlement analyst. So let me just break down this for you. First of all, is how does the clearing and settlement analyst entire process actually work, right? So first, if we look at any of the trade which happens in the exchange or in the market, it goes through a very simple process. Is that there is a buyer and a seller who are initiating a trade, cash is exchanged, and securities are delivered. This is actually the only process which takes place. And you might think that, okay, that's pretty simple in terms of the steps of the process, because the steps of the process is really simple, right? But what are the activities which are going on behind are probably more intensive, and clearing and settlement analyst is really related to this exact process which happens, right? So it's obviously a back office investment banking operations process in which the job of a clearing and a settlement analyst is to make sure that this process actually happens smoothly, and the securities actually get delivered and the cash actually get exchanged. And of course there are other events which are related to security. Now, since you are dealing with securities, so you should understand all the effects of the securities, right? What are the different things which can affect a security? So let's go to the interview preparation side. What are the things which you should be knowing related to the securities? Now, in order to keep things simpler, I'm just talking about equity securities at the moment, but the job requires that you also might be related to settlement of fixed income securities, then you might have to read the same thing about fixed income, but that would be the framework of preparation. So basic events related to securities are dividends, which is basically that every company might give quarterly dividends, which is basically the share of the profit which the board decides that can be distributed on a per share basis. Stock split is basically when the stock, if there's one stock, you can just split it into two. Why would a company split a stock? Is to increase the number of shares in the market. Mergers is basically when two companies, for example, Vodafone and Idea merger is a classic example of the basic events related to securities, and what would be the effect that it would have on the stock, right? And on, let's say, once the trade has happened, how would the merger affect the entire reconciliation process and the settlement process? Rights issues is when the company specifically goes to its own shareholders and gives the right to buy the shares at a discounted price. This might be a very nice strategy to actually raise more capital without actually doing the entire IPO or probably selling to a qualified institutional buyer. It is much more easier to sell it to your own shareholders. And what would be the incentive? The incentive would be that the shares would be obviously available at a cheaper rate, right? Bonus shares is when we are talking about, let's say, if you had one share and I would say that, okay, now you get one more share. So it actually does not have real effect on price, but again, it would have somewhat similar effect of a stock split, right? Tender offers is when we are actually selling a tender, we are creating a tender, a contract stating that we want to buy certain shares from certain sects of the buyers or the owners of the shareholders at a certain rate at a certain time, right? So that would be a tender offer. Now, important question is, once these basic events you are aware of, basic corporate action events, right, you are aware of, the next part would be the effect related to the events, right? So, for example, what would be the impact of stock split on the settlement process is that an analyst has to see before the settlement was happened, was the stock split there? And if, let's say, the settlement is happening post during the process of settlement itself, the stock split, then you will have to reconcile the before and after to adjust for the number of shares, right? Handling a failed trade is to first, you have to understand that since you are applying for this position as a fresher, that of course you don't understand how this process in actual works, but you would definitely know the logic that if you want to understand a failed trade can actually happen either because of the buyer or the seller. So either the buyer does not have enough cash in his bank, and or on the seller side, the seller does not have enough securities. So once you find the root cause of who actually is the problem, then you inform the counterparties, of course, so that you inform them to either put the enough cash to settle the trade, or inform the counterparty to provide the security. And also, if you are dealing with, mostly you would be dealing with non-Indian markets, there are obviously a penalty which is associated with this. That's how you actually handle a failed trade, and that kind of an answer is more than enough convincing for the interviewer. Right, now let's talk about record date and ex date. So record date is a date which, before the company releases the dividend, the company has discussed this, that okay, we want to release let's say 5 rupees per stock as a dividend. So who would be the eligible shareholders? So the date on which it gets decided, at that time, if you are the shareholder of the company, then that becomes a record date. So the ex date, we're basically talking about a date one day after the record date. So the record date, we decided that okay, these are the eligible shareholders who would be entitled to get the dividend or the stock split or the bonus, whatever, right? And tomorrow is basically called as the ex date. So if ever the question arises that if, let's say, a trade has actually happened in the market, and now you're deciding that who gets the dividend, so the answer would be that if the seller was actually the seller was owning the security before the record date or on the record date, then the dividends would pass through the seller. But if the dividend or the record date happens after the selling of security, then obviously the dividend goes to the buyer of the security, right? So that kind of questions you can expect is to understanding the effect of all of these corporate actions, right? Corporate actions, usually people don't understand what is the meaning of corporate action. This is corporate action, right? So now this is advanced. Nobody would penalize you for these questions if you don't answer. Is swift messages related to confirmation, swift messages related to notification. Even if you would remember one or two, or even if you did not know and you said that I'm new to this, that would not really matter, right? But it just shows that if somebody knows these terminology, that means the person really has the interest in the job, right? Systems used in settlement process. What are the various systems used in so a brief overview, you can just watch a couple of videos to understand how these systems actually look, right? Understanding what is T+1, T+3, it's the trade plus 1 day for settlement. T+3 means trade plus 3 days for the entire trade to settlement. So related to this job description of clearing and settlement analyst, whether it's Deutsche or whether it's any other bank, would be the preparations, minimum preparation required to attend the interview as a fresher. So I hope this video helps.